Thank you. Well, thank you. I assume you're either here because you're passionately interested in closing the skill gap as we are, or you got in really late, smelled the coffee, or not exactly sure where you are. But whatever your motivation or reason, we're delighted to have you. We're looking to do something different this morning. Whereas traditionally panels try and present information or try to persuade you to do something or believe something, we're actually here to try and collectively learn something. We invited you to a brainstorming session. We've tried to drive you as close to us as possible in terms of seating, and we're really here to hopefully leave in about 50 minutes with some new ideas in terms of how to proceed. To just briefly set the stage. As you know, the governor, along with fixing the roads, has established closing the skill gap as her second principal priority. And the reason is the business community, the economic community, and so forth has clearly communicated that unless we find ways to generate a substantial increase in the number of degreed people and people certified in specific skills, our economy cannot grow, it cannot flourish. We are going to be trapped in a downward spiral. And further, when you look at the scale of the need and the demographics, you can't do it by simply improving the destiny of our high school graduates. We simply don't graduate enough students from high school to meet the need. So in a way that is really unique to this state, to the country, and as we've checked around the sort of the industrialized world, increasingly new to everyone, is this question of how is it we get a very substantial, maybe 20–25% of our current adult workforce to decide that they want to come back and acquire a credential that improves their positioning in the labor market and responds to real demand. What gives us a new opportunity is the governor, as you know, has proposed two pieces of legislation, My Opportunity and Reconnect, which provide tuition-free access to community college for two groups. For those coming out of high school, anyone coming out of high school, getting a high school diploma or its equivalent, is then entitled to 2 years of tuition-free community college. With Reconnect, anybody who's lived here a year, who's 25 or older and doesn't have a college degree, they can have a certificate, but they don't have a college degree, can come back and is entitled to 2 years of community college. It's last dollar. We ask you're required to apply for a federal Pell Grant first, but ultimately from the person's point of view, it's tuition free. So the question before us collectively today is, with the high likelihood of these both passing, they're bipartisan, united business community behind both of them, labor, much of the education community, the Community College Association, we're highly optimistic that we will have these tools next year. So the question is, how can we use these tools, particularly Reconnect, with the current adult workforce, to meet specific business or industry needs? We've invited 3 people who actually have been thinking about this, have been involved in this work to get us going. But knowing almost all of you here, which is, I assume, the reason you are here, we're going to look to you for ideas. So let's begin. Melanie, Detroit Drives tries to look at this in terms of the whole Southeast region. You've been focusing on adults in addition to kids coming out of high school. What are you finding? What do you see? Where are we at this point in terms of training adults and also the connection with community college?
Yeah, so Detroit Drives Degrees officially launched its work to focus on adult students actually right here on the island last year. We held a press conference out on the porch announcing that Detroit was among 24 other cities that had been designated a talent hub by the Kresge and Lumina Foundations. And that was because of Detroit Drives Degrees' effort to bring together business leaders with education stakeholders and nonprofit executives and government officials all around this common goal of education attainment. What's exciting is we launched this work around adults that had some college but no degree. There are 693,000 of these adults in Southeast Michigan. And so we kind of launched a threefold strategy to try to re-engage these adults. And central to this, the first kind of key aspect of this was working with employers. I mean, we are the Detroit Regional Chamber. We have 2,500 member businesses. And these are a lot of the adults that we're seeking to engage are working for our member companies. And so we identified and lifted up companies like MGM Grand and Quicken and Comcast that already provide tuition assistance. And I think to Doug's point, there's a tremendous opportunity with Reconnect to further leverage existing employee tuition supports that companies already have, to combine that with public policies like My Opportunity and Reconnect. The second strategy that we worked really closely with higher ed institutions to look at the data. We had them, and I see a number of my partners in crime here that did this. We looked at 10 years of data of 5 different higher ed institutions and looked for common themes among all of those who stopped out before finishing. And interestingly, one of the common themes was 25% of individuals who stopped out before finishing their degree or credential had some sort of financial hold on their accounts. And so through the leadership of Wayne State University and later Henry Ford College, as well as Oakland University, joined to create the first in the nation debt forgiveness compact, where we had an agreement where individuals could re-enroll in higher ed institutions that were participating here and learn their way out of debt. And I have to say, we've gotten a lot of national recognition from this. The entire state of Missouri is seeking to replicate this now. Boston, Kansas City are all kind of looking to Detroit as a model for how to re-engage adults. And the last strategy really was born out of necessity with this. The chamber actually had to hire a full-time advisor because we had 200 individuals since the press announcement just a month ago reach out to the chamber and say, could you help us re-enroll in higher ed? So I just want to underscore that the chamber programmatically is working to drive this work with adults, but I think we've endorsed the governor's proposals because the opportunity to create systemic change would really help us move the needle in terms of re-engaging adults.
Russ, you actually are at Henry Ford doing a lot of this. What seems powerful? What could be expanded if tuition ceased to be as much of an issue? How could we expand demand?
Well, most of the work that the Chamber has done has eliminated some of the earliest thoughts of barriers, which were cost and tuition and fees through MEAF and Detroit Promise, and frankly, educating the community about the resources that are there. That barrier is not gone, but it is being evaluated. I think the next step that higher ed could use help on is getting the piece that draws students in more effectively, which is a promise or a clear path to a meaningful career or job. And the partnerships that higher ed has made with employers and industry are something I think that is the next thing that, frankly, the Detroit Regional Chamber can and shown us how to do is make those partnerships. And we have those partnerships at Henry Ford College now, and my hope is to expand those significantly. And DTE Energy is the one we're very proud of. We're also partners with Ford Motor Company. It kind of works with our name.
Right.
And frankly, the goal there is to say to students, invest in yourself through education, and we have looked at a path for you to a meaningful career. And we're doing that now with DTE Energy. We agree with the former governor and the current governor that 800,000 unfilled jobs will be existent in the next 5 years. The folks from DTE Energy tell us that half of their workforce in these types of frontline positions will retire in those next 5 years, which is why we're partnering with DTE Energy and frankly the entire energy industry to make partnerships where students come to us and in less than a year, right around a year, they come in, get certified, and get nearly guaranteed jobs. And we're in our 3rd year of that. And I think if we scale that, then we can sell to students, look, the government, if you're right, Doug, that the legislature sees fit to pass this, and I've supported it, I've written in favor of it, then we'll be able to say the government's supporting it, the higher education institutions are supporting it, and by the way, now here are these employers who have identified these jobs with partnership with these higher ed institutions that are meaningful paths to careers. I think that's what I hear as parents and students and adult learners, they're still hunting for.
Lynette, DTE was invoked here. You've got this challenge. What are you doing now, and what's your strategy or thoughts on how you achieve the scale that you need?
Right. Well, thank you for that. And first of all, I just want to thank all of you for being here this morning. I know this was an early start, so thank you for coming in this morning. DTE Energy, as Russ mentioned, we expect to have 50% of our frontline workers retiring over the next 5 years. And we know that we're in competition to refill those jobs with many other businesses and industries around the state. We are not the only industry that's struggling right now. And I was so pleased with the governor and the lieutenant governor, and she spoke about this yesterday, that they went out and visited, I think, over 200 community colleges and or high schools with career tech and engineering programs. And when you think about career tech, I know many decades ago when I was in high school, we had vocational class. Students had the opportunity to, as opposed to maybe taking college prep classes, they took vocational classes and really got the hands-on learning in high school, and then they were more prepared and more confident to go into apprenticeships across many, many different industries. So, I think one of the breaks is we got rid of a lot of the vocational classes in the high schools, and I also think that we've had a break in students and adults feeling that they could be successful, because many of our community members struggle with math and struggle with reading. And if you struggle with that already, your probability of taking that step to go to college or maybe finish your degree because maybe you had a difficulty while you were in a community college, I think can get in the way of some of our thinking. It's a barrier that we don't recognize oftentimes. So I think those are some things that we need to work on. DTE Energy Foundation is really invested in students with barriers, differently abled students, and returning citizens. We've got a partnership with Parnell Correctional Institute to work with a cohort of those that are in the prison system and prepare them and train them in a way so they can be prepared to re-enter and join the workforce when they come out of that. The partnership that we have with Henry Ford Community College and other community colleges across the state really are all about sharing with them what we need as a company, understanding what they need as a community college, and understanding whether there's the probability of a marriage to actually make a difference for adults in our communities. And I think one of the most important things that we have to do when we're courting is be clear about whether or not it fits for both of us.
By the way, I was from an era where we took a vocational education class. It was hugely important. The model boat I made was didn't float, sank, and I decided politics probably was a more promising future for me. One of the challenges with adults is not necessarily having the expectation that they would have to go back for some formal education, being that they have some college or none, not a lot of confidence perhaps in their academic ability, all of the issues of convenience and so forth. If we're going to write down the cost, ideas, things people have seen where we've created learning arrangements or products that make it easier for adults to, either through their employer or individually, to kind of step forward and re-enroll, rededicate themselves? What have any of you seen that we ought to be thinking about or promoting? Yeah, Doug.
So if I can, I get kind of question to the audience, or to the panel rather. You know, if jobs, and I think you're right, it has to be something where 8 weeks, 10 weeks, maybe a year, there's a job there for them, or a career that they can get involved in. I think all the constraints are there, or at least obstacles, whether it's time. It's not just money, it's time, it's transportation. You know, you talk about convenience, you know, it's daycare, it's healthcare, starting with dental care, all of those things are there. But sometimes we look to try to create new and don't look at some of the existing partnerships. And so I guess I'm curious from all three of you, I think Michigan Works is an agency that's underutilized in terms of our collaboration with them, in terms of getting adults back in. They come to them for a job, they come to them for job training, and sometimes there's a gulf between those and the educational institutions. So do you see Michigan Works as a critical element in moving forward in this whole debate?
Anybody here
Yeah,
had
I
an
can jump
experience
in
working
on
with
that
them?
one.
Yeah, Lynette.
From DTE Energy's perspective, we work closely with Michigan Works to find those individuals that would be a good connection for us. So Michigan Works is part of our, you know, when you think of your family of support systems, Michigan Works is one of the members of that family.
Detroit Drives Degrees is part of a national organization called the Graduate Network, which is a collection of communities all across the United States that are doing this type of work. And one of the great strategies that they've really been imploring us to pursue is to train the employees of the workforce one-stops in sort of about the educational opportunities that they could pursue. And so that's something we've actually already begun to talk about with the city of Detroit is, you know, how can their employees be good kind of spokespeople for the importance of continuing education, and what does that look like from a practical perspective?
Russ had mentioned, I'll go to Rose in a second here. Russ had mentioned that the jobs with DTE were almost guaranteed, I think was the term you used. Is there a way, one of the, I think, obstacles to adults is they're not in a position to buy education too speculatively. There has to be some sense. It's such a sacrifice. It's so hard that there has to be some greater certainty that there really is employment at a higher wage at the end. So we go to Rose, but I would like your thoughts on whether you've seen arrangements between business and education opportunities that reduce that level of risk. Rose?
Cheryl Kennedy, state representative.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I know where you're making the link there. So I represent the 48th district, which is north and east sides of Genesee County.
And is the principal sponsor of My Opportunity Bill in the House.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So the median wage in my district for women is $36,000 a year. Median wage for men is $47,000 a year. I'm interested in if in any of your data there was demographic information regarding how many of those folks who stopped college based on gender and other factors.
It's a great question. I don't know the data that was pulled from the 5 institutions that pursue this, but I think I remember Wayne State. So they actually launched their debt forgiveness program a year ago, and 70% of their students that re-enrolled were women, largely African-American women. And that's true across the board now. More women are pursuing higher education than men, but I think strategies to re-engage adult learners in particular do benefit women significantly.
Just transversely, probably OnSite Childcare would be a huge asset.
Yep. Absolutely, yeah, that's a key, and that's actually one area where I think employer partners can provide a really key role, and higher ed partners too, having on-site childcare there, either at the employer or the community college.
Russ, what are the let's see, President Snyder from Macomb here too. What are the economics of doing childcare? Have you tried doing on-site childcare? Do you have a sense of, for adults coming, or particularly if it's at night or weekend?
We actually have a facility on site that is a child care facility, and the history of that site was both a learning lab for early child curricula, hoping to support staff who had child care needs and students. Like most of these student-supported mechanisms that are trying to help these non-standard populations get into education, they don't make financial sense. I'm not saying that they should. I'm just saying that to do these types of supports that are right and necessary for the populations that Representative Kennedy mentioned, higher education institutions are stuck with either trying to figure out how to cost that out, and we hear about it. There's several presidents in this audience. We hear about it all the time about how expensive our product is. And by the way, it's $177 a credit hour at Henry Ford College for an out-of-district student, and that's an associate's degree for less than $10,000, and it's a fantastic educational product, so I will push back on that. But in that debate, I've got to figure out how to fund that kind of support for that type of person, because it is not an easily accessible product there. If you go to anyone who operates childcare, it's expensive, and everyone in this room who's ever paid for it knows that, including me.
Right.
So then you've either got to go find employers who are willing to help you support that mechanism, and that synergy right there is not, we haven't done that yet. My hope is that my opportunity is the grease that gets us from higher education and for-profit employers and nonprofit employers. The grease is that we can start being more synergistic. But all of us have thought about that, and you either can't do it because it's too expensive, or you do it and then find someone to push the cost onto. And you don't want to do it to the person, particularly the 54% of my students that are female. You don't want to put that on them. And trustees, you know what you say to us when we come to raise tuition for those types of things. We're in a box. So if you're from industry here and you agree with that, tell Representative Kennedy to support my opportunity. I mean, she wrote or co-signed the bill, so I don't think you'll have a tough sell there.
Yeah, right.
But then go to your employers and say, look, we've got to support the government thinking about increasing revenue to support this problem. The skills gap is real, and we can just kind of look at it and think about it, or we can devote resources to it as a state.
Have you seen or worked, are you an employer, or have you worked with employers that were able to somehow provide some of these supplementary services to enable their own employees to upskill, or where the speculative risk has somehow been written down significantly by an employer saying, if you do X, we can, we've interviewed you in advance and so forth, you can get this particular position? Yes.
I'm Andy Hetzel. I work at Blue Cross and Blue Shield in Michigan, but I want to speak as the parent of a high school and a middle school student, and I want to speak to what kids of my kids' ages are looking forward to. It sounds like these initiatives are really paving the runway, as we need to keep talent in Michigan. It doesn't matter how strong the runway is, though, if you get on the wrong plane. And so what I want to do is I want to encourage you all to think about kids in middle school and high school and how they are engaged in the school environment toward career, not just on the daily academics, but do they have the resources and engagements that they need from the adults in their worlds in school to help identify their academic talents and their passion points and align those so when they get to a decision about where to go, either a 2-year community college, hopefully for free, right, or a 4-year institution of higher learning, they're on a path to a career already. I feel that many students that attend 4-year universities are trying to find their way as they go through the academics and incur the costs of a 4-year university. And so to me, it sounds like you're putting the resources to work to pave the runway. If you can put some effort behind that, you can more efficiently spend those dollars to get to the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Can I?
Yes. Oh, did you want to respond?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Was it Steve? Andy. Sorry, Andy. You're absolutely right. And we need help explaining that at the community college level, because we have the answer, and that is the most cost-effective way to spend the first 2 years of figuring out what you want to do when you grow up are at community colleges. It's not even comparable. And the liberal arts education that all of us have, there's several presidents here, all of us have, is very high quality, particularly in Southeast Michigan. And you can learn as a young adult what you want to do, and then at the same time, we have these types of programs with DTE Energy where your constituents can make $48,000 a year after 1 year at Henry Ford College, and the first cadre had 9 of them go through, 10 of them, and 9 of them are employed now in the energy sector. So if you start on that path and you take a math class and a writing class, and then you start looking at the technical education that are at all of our institutions, then you may stop and not get an associate's degree, but you may get a job, and then you may come back. And that is, I think, the next horizon of higher education, is that the college environment that I interacted with, and frankly most of you all probably did, was a runway that was 4 years at 4-year institutions, and that's still very, very viable, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. But for the cost-effective decisions that you've just described, Andy, help us tell the community that community colleges are the way to help young people do that. Ford Motor Company will send its people to us for 18 months. This is not a degree program. It's certificates to work on Ford vehicles, and dealerships across the region pay for that with a job. And the students spend 8 weeks with me, then 8 weeks in the shop, back and forth for a year and a half, and then they have a job. It's there. We need to be able to explain that.
And this does make sense, but I do want to focus this back on adults to some extent.
Doug, if I can, Doug Smith with Oakland Community College. I mean, I think there are some very good examples. I mean, DTE, Ford Motor Company, consumers all have pretty good programs. But I think this isn't about, I think that's why there's not so many of the relationships and programs you're looking for. And part of it is the reality that for years, we've not done a good job, and I'm talking about the community college, which is the forefront of that. We've not done a good job of being able to meet the needs, the short-term training needs for upskilling the existing workforce with companies. So they've lost confidence. So what do? They create their own training programs internal. And there's hundreds of them. And it isn't just the FANUCs and the FCAs, it's small and medium-sized companies that start creating their own programs. And it's because we haven't shown them that our doorway is anything but, we want you to do an associate's degree. And so short-term training has to be our other front door that says whether it's 1 day, it's a week, it's every Friday for 5 weeks. So that short-term training is something that we've got to build better relationships with companies so that they're not, and I'm not going to point at DTE or consumers in this, but some companies do the education piece as kind of their community service. Until we become part of their retention programs and critical to their training, we won't have those partnerships that I think produce the kind of models that you're looking for. The other adjunct that I just make a comment to is in the relationships with companies too, every time I meet with a company, they say, how can I help? And I'll tell you, one of the places they can help is we don't have instructors. And I don't just need a retiree or somebody close to retirement. I need a 45-year-old that the company says to them, your compensation includes 2 nights of teaching at a K-12 or a community college, 2 hours a night, twice a week, and that's part of your job. That's the kind of thing that we need to do, is have that relationship, whether it's real partnership with our companies, if we're going to produce those models that really make them commit to jobs for our graduates.
And let's not dismiss people close to retirement too quick. But okay, yeah. So.
I would not do that.
Doug, I know you want to get back to adults, and certainly that there's a lot of available adults that we could train, and there has to be transparency and a partnership. But I just want to address the issue with, the high schools. We see a lot of the 4-year institutions, the outreach to the high schools, where we don't see the community colleges as much. And it's, they need to understand the potential jobs and the transparency that are available and the track. Just, from our standpoint, you see Oakland University, you see Michigan State, U of M, et cetera, but you don't see the community colleges outreach. And I know resources are limited, but that's something that you could perhaps do a better job of, is going out to the schools. There are schools like Cornerstone Schools that have the vocation, they have the different pathways where they do have internships at different companies, and when they graduate, they do have a pathway to get hired and get their tuition paid for. And I think that that's a really good model that can be replicated across different high schools. And I can talk, but just going back to the adults, I mean, let's talk about the international population. There's a lot of people that are coming in to this country that have degrees that could work. There's, different populations of people. We happen to focus on technical skills, so that's more IT and engineering, less of the skilled labor piece. But I think we need to understand where the demand is, which was the work that was done with the Marshall Plan in terms of the 5 different areas that we're seeing severe shortages, and we have to understand the funnel, the pipeline of individuals that we could potentially train. And it's not going to be a one size fits all. It's going to be a different solution for each population, depending on what we're talking about here, whether they're degreed people, whether they're women re-entering the workforce and don't have a pathway. I know that we're engaged with a new effort called Silicon Lakes that really addresses the needs in IT and having women that have degrees in STEM and that want to re-enter into the workforce and don't have a clear way of doing that because they feel like their skills are outdated, and putting them in contact with corporations and providing that training so that they could get skilled up and re-enter the workforce through a relaunch program. So what I'm saying is that it's not one size fits all. We need to address these different populations in a different way.
I guess, Lynette, Doug mentioned the fact that employers, for a lot of reasons, do a huge amount of the training that takes place in the state in-house. In fact, is that an efficient way to do it that we ought to look to somehow be supporting more? I mean, the idea is not to force business into some framework that somehow suits us. How do we increase that? Is there a way to do it through them?
So my answer to that is it depends. I think that corporations typically design and build training programs that are very, very specific to the work that they do. And that, in my opinion, needs to stay in-house because it's so specific to their company or the work that they do. The other side of that is, for the work that's more general across industries, that's exactly where I think our community college partners can fill that void and help that niche. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the responsibility. You talked about the responsibility of the community college presidents and administration of telling their story and bringing things into the college. I think from a business perspective, it's our job at DTE Energy. We have a vast supply chain. And one of the things that we do with our supply chain and our contractors is try to link them in as well so that they're on the end of that process to be able to pull the pipeline into jobs that they need. So I think larger companies like Consumers and DTE and others, getting our supply base involved in the overall process to help us build the pipeline is critical so that they know where to go and how to connect with the different community colleges. I also want to speak to your conversation about middle schoolers and high schoolers. How do they get on the pathway? How do they even get exposed to what might be? Because they might not decide what their job's going to be until they're 25, 30 years old. But how do they get that exposure? And one of the things that we do at DTE Energy across the state is we employ about 1,500 young people, either through Grow Detroit's Young Talent, Muskegon Lakeshore, to get young people some opportunity to experience things that they may never even think of to do. And I think when companies can give young people the opportunity to see what's possible, they can start to create an idea around where they might be able to go. So I think that's important. I think that's incumbent on companies to partner across the state to give young people an opportunity. And I know, Doug, that doesn't go to our adults.
That's all right now.
It doesn't go to our adults, but someday they will be adults.
Right.
And I just think that this is a full pipeline conversation, and free college it helps to eliminate one of the barriers for adults to either finish certificates or finish their degree.
Doug, can I just respond to your question? And that was, I think there's a big change in training programs that has happened in the last 3 or 4 years. And that is and I'll use FANUC as an example. When we went to FANUC 3 or 4 years ago and said, we want to do some of your training for you because you're doing so much of it, is there part of it that we could take, and I think you're right, it depends, some of it's proprietary, but the old school was, oh, ours is all proprietary, we can give you the curriculum, but you train only our people, and then you give it back. Today, that dialogue is totally different. It is 10% is proprietary, 90% you can do, and the only way we can scale this up to get enough employees is to have you do it. So they're giving us the curriculum, they're training our faculty. That's a whole different world today that we need to take more advantage of. And FCA is the same example, FANUC is a good example. So our relationship with companies has changed pretty dramatically, because now they're not telling us this curriculum has to be only ours. FANUC will say, if you train somebody for ABB or KUKA, that's okay. We'll steal them from them sometime later.
Right.
But we can't steal it up without the community colleges, with the higher education involved with it.
Representative?
I love that you brought up proprietary, because I believe we used to have a model of your public school and a public school program or your proprietary school, and those definitions are very limiting regarding what we can do and even capturing federal dollars and all kinds of things. We have so many different models. We have middle college models and early college models. We have certification. We have career technical education going on in public school, but maybe it's that 13th year model.
Partnering with community colleges in my area. And I really think we need to create, either redefine proprietary or create a new definition for a new type of learning that truly is the merging of the public and the private for this kind of skill development. There are just so many issues with my OSHA, getting kids on the on a workplace so that they can experience those things. There are a lot of barriers that are just built into our policy and based on definitions that are definitions from the last century. And I really think that we need to start to be a little more creative in how we define public education and when we have private partnerships along with that, and when the K-12 merges with community college. I think that if we look really closely at our policy at the federal level and how sometimes there are huge barriers, and it's just a matter of a definition of a learning program versus, what do we want to do? We're trying to invent something here in Michigan, and that's very exciting to be a part of that. But we also have to make sure that we're pushing for federal policy and maybe creating some new definitions in education so that we can help ourselves instead of always, here's the next, I can consider them artificial barriers just based on certain definitions in law and policy.
Good.
Doug?
We have, yes, Stephanie Beckhorn, who is the acting director of TED.
Good morning. Doug, I want to go back to the comment you made earlier about childcare. I want to talk about that because I think it's so critically important, and I think there's bigger benefit to it, not just to Reconnect and My Opportunity, but to individuals that are part of the public assistance and work requirements that are coming down. So I think there's a broader usage of tapping into the component of providing childcare. We know it's just like it's sometimes the easiest part is getting a person a job, the harder part is having them keep that job. I want to make sure that with Reconnect and My Opportunity that getting the person to start the training program, that we keep them in the program, and we really look to retention and barrier removal, including childcare, is one of the key components. I think we want to go back and we need to engage employers who are doing this. I think from a Lansing perspective, I think an employer that does it is Jackson National. If you drive by their campus, the first thing you will see is their child care center. And it's not just for employees. I have friends at the state that use their child care center. So I'm imagining it's a scale, right? They understood to get to a point to not lose money. Mm-hmm. They had to open it up not just to their employees, but to the community. And so I think there's some evidence that employers like them. There has to be others. We need them to be part of the dialogue to say why we're doing it. Because right now, where we are with our unemployment rate and the struggle that employers face, this is, if we're going to ever do it, it's going to be now. And employers can buy into that to say that's another component to try to attract the best talent to my business. And I think it's something we can get around, but we need to have employers who are doing that at the table and telling the story. They'll tell a much more compelling story than we will.
We've got 11 minutes and 45 seconds left. I think the issue still that we're talking about, childcare is certainly a piece of it, and helping folks, adults as well as young people, have a sense of a path. But here we have employers where most of the adults we're talking about are employed. We've got community college and four-year capacity. I see the president of Davenport is here, and Davenport does a lot of very occupationally focused four-year degrees. What are strategies, what are theories of action for scale? Increasing participation on the margins by doing it a little better, by selling it a little more, just aren't going to get us there. Yeah.
Let me help you answer that question. Just kind of get back to the purpose of the presentation of how business could use tuition-free community college. By the way, Peter Provenzano, Chancellor at Oakland Community College. One of the things that we're doing now really is going to the companies with a team and recruiting. So there's a lot of conversation about reaching young people in the middle school, high school, and doing some recruiting, and that's been our focus in the past, and that will continue to be. But now we're really taking a similar strategy and going to the employers, and we're walking into the employers and saying, look, we realize that the 600,000 job postings that are going to occur over the next 5 years, those are happening now. You don't have time to wait for that 13-year-old to go through high school and go through college and come work for you. And so they have this wealth of knowledge and talent that exists within their company. People that may want to move up, reskill, upskill. And they're oftentimes struggling with training those employees. And so we're walking in and saying, how can we help you? What is it that you need? And we're amazed at two things. One, they will very quickly give us a list of courses and classes that they would send their employees to. Many of them we already offer, and they had no idea. Others, we can do a customized training program, and they're just absolutely delighted about that. And so we're walking in and with a team of people to try to help with that training so that they can send those employees to training and get them back into the workforce very quickly. And that's, I think, very important to keep the jobs here. But what we're finding is that also those employees that are coming to OCC are now going back home and talking to their kids, the future generation, about OCC and the importance of skilled trade. So it's changing the conversation. And it's helping that. And so having a free community college tuition in our toolbox when we go to that company would help a lot, because now the company has the ability to say, look, there's free tuition that you might be able to take advantage of, or they may be able to, if they're not qualifying for that free tuition, the company might be willing to pay the tuition. And we know that students are more likely to persist if the employer says, there's a job waiting for you if you do this. We know they're more likely going to do it. So that's just an idea of something that we're doing.
So maybe Russ, you have views, or others here who are running community colleges, are the demographics going to be enough incentive to increasingly push community colleges and four-year institutions to go out and work this employer base for more customers? Or do we need to do some things as a communities to either encourage it or incent it? How is that going to happen fast enough at a big enough scale so that we're beginning to see a much enhanced flow of adults coming from these companies to get new skills or credentials?
I don't know the answer to your question. I'm hopeful that the answer is yes, we can accomplish this. Here's some of the things that I want to point out as a possible path to the scale you're describing. Jim Sawyer is the president. He's actually holding the microphone. Jim Sawyer is the president of Macomb Community College, and Peter just talked. He's the chancellor at Oakland Community College. The three of us, I've just got to tell you, those are good executive leaders in Southeast Michigan. I'm pretty proud of our institution, who care about this and are willing to do exactly what Peter just said, and that is to be the service provider to employers. Where we could use help, and I hope there are a couple employers here, and maybe there's some members, Melanie, that you and I can talk to. the value proposition that we're trying to get effectively across that Peter just described is, if you're making something for profit, you're making widgets, and you need certain products for those widgets, I can guarantee there's someone at an executive level whose job it is to keep the amount of materials coming into the operation to make the widgets. Mm-hmm. I ask CEOs, does your logistics person also have an idea of when 50% of your workforce is going to go away, what is the line of that, your human capital? And if you don't have an answer for that, think about community colleges. We're already state subsidized. We've been around 80 years in Henry Ford College. 80 years we've been educating people on technical issues. And we are almost there to have the state government help us pay for tuition for your own employees. Pick a winner. Macomb is good. Oakland is good. Henry Ford College is good. Pick one of us and say, I want to partner with you, like DTE Energy is doing. Help us build the product that we can get. And on the other side, we'll promise to hire your students. I think that's the next path.
Yeah, President Snyder.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, hi. Good morning. Roger Curtis, Vice President at Consumers Energy, school board member, former director of TED, practitioner of School of Choice, child at Michigan State. I run the gamut in education. I just want to say I'm very energized by the conversation in this room. And I say this with all due respect. There's a lot of MacGyvering going on. And that is, you're figuring out, because the system is broken, how to make it better. But I love how the conversation has morphed from free tuition to wraparound services to lack of career exposure. And so this is just a reminder that as you MacGyver your way through this, the system is broken. And so I love, Lynn, what you said. Doug, what you're talking about with scale. Lynn, the pipeline is the problem. There still needs to be a holistic approach to fixing education. When you have 752 students per counselor, and I know we're focusing on adults here too, kids don't know what opportunities are out there, much less where to go for them. So please, just as you work on the patchwork, and that's very important, please don't forget that we have to, this is a moonshot. I know education and the whole system is huge, and it is going to be like putting a person on the moon, but if we want to fix Michigan, we have to do it. But great job, everyone.
Doug, Jim Sawyer from Macomb Community College.
Yeah.
And in response to your question about strategies that are working, I mean, we've had some great success with some grants over the last several years that were really the short-term training that Doug was talking about. And really, those were very well connected to employers. I mean, we set those programs up deliberately with employers in the room. They were designed for them specifically. But the key was this funding, which you're helping address that issue. The funding was there to put those people through those training programs, and there was a job waiting on their end. But the key was these were the shorter-term training programs. And I really can't overemphasize enough, for the long-term success, these short-term training programs are the entry portal. And those are something that we can build upon, and people can move on for further education when they're ready, and we want to encourage that. But the key is, folks who are coming to us for training need to get a job, right? They need to have a family sustainable job to support their family. It's very directed. Those folks are motivated, and by providing this funding for that, I think we are solving one of those problems. Roger just talked about the wraparound services. We've had to adopt our training programs to include a lot of those things, where in the past we focused solely on the technical aspects of the job. Now we have to include those other support services. And again, the funding here is a great start to help do that, but I want to make sure we don't just focus on the 2-year degree or 4-year degree, because I think that's won't be as successful.
And we're down to 2 minutes and 42 seconds. President Snyder and Stephanie.
Jim Sawyer.
Sawyer, I'm sorry, President Sawyer and Stephanie were part of an initial process. We've started to talk about how to design these programs as we go forward. One of the things with the legislation is proposed to make it more affordable, it's last dollar. In other words, you apply for federal Pell Grants first. A lot of these short-term training programs, which appear to be very effective and so forth, don't qualify for that kind of funding. One could include them in a bill, but then again, you're paying state's paying full weight And they don't necessarily result in credit that can be stackable or that you can use to ultimately earn some higher certificate or degree.
They lead to credentials, they lead to jobs, and that's what we're trying
Right,
to solve.
right. So that's an issue to wrestle with in all of this, because right now, if it doesn't qualify for that, it's not eligible for tuition.
There is federal legislation pending to reduce the number of hours required to get Pell eligible by half, which would encompass the programs that Jim and Henry Ford College work on. It's, if you know about it, tell your congressional representative to support it. I think it's got bipartisan support, and I think it's going to get passed this summer.
Okay. Last question. A governor has a bully pulpit. A governor can be part of telling stories and creating culture. If we want businesses and adults to begin thinking differently about how to manage their skill needs on the part of the business, their careers on the part of the individuals, what should a leader, what should a state be doing to try and facilitate that, to accelerate that cultural change? Because it is a culture change from the way we've tended to live our lives. Any thoughts?
We only have 40 seconds left.
We do.
So I'm just going to
36.
I'm going to
Hit it,
throw out
Lynette.
I'm going to throw out one thing that we haven't talked about at all, and just say, as Roger mentioned, it's a patchwork. One of the things that DTE Foundation supports in a great way, in addition to wraparound services, is we provide grants to organizations that help with niche entities that have barriers. An example would be English as a second language. We have Mercy Education Project in the city of Detroit helps women get prepared for the workforce so that they could then take advantage of a two-year college. And there are many nonprofits like Mercy Education Project that can serve a niche of a population that has barriers, so that once they take care of that barriers, they're prepared to go into a certificate program or higher education. So I don't want to discount those opportunities as well.
And I would just add, I think, what the governor can do using her bully pulpit is to reinforce what we've heard across the room today, is that we no longer have the model where you're educated, you get your job, and you kind of move up the career ladder and you're done with educating. Now we are constantly needing to kind of move back and forth between education and jobs and retraining. And I think the governor is doing that. That's what this legislation is meant to do. And it's kind of the new era that we live in this economy now, and the demand is significant.
Okay. So let me end first with a thank you to the members of the panel for helping us get this conversation going at an informed and high level. And secondly, as you can see from the conversation, there are lots of questions related to this for which we don't yet have clear answers at all. So in terms of how we create this new culture, how we build, strengthen, and expand these relationships between employers and higher education institutions, and the role of government in all of that, and how it relates back to K-12, we need lots of ideas and lots of input. So this is an invitation ongoing to participate in this discussion actively and help make sure that as a community we come up with answers that are powerful enough to give us a shot at being more prosperous. After all, my role is senior advisor on prosperity. If we don't prosper, I'm fired. I'm out of a job. Maybe too late to retrain. So I'm calling on you for all of your help. So thank you, and thanks for coming out this morning and engaging with us. Thank you.